back as we finish up Unit 3, looking at the institutions of government or the branches of government. We would be remiss if we did not include what is growing to be referred to as the fourth branch of government. Although not prescribed in the actual Constitution, the federal bureaucracy has become an extension of the executive branch that has grown to operate the large-scale processes, organizations, and departments that the government has grown to need through its expansion and complexity. Oftentimes, when we hear the word bureaucracy, for some people, they think immediately of the tax collector's office or the DMV. They think of slow, inefficient, red tape, government overreach, sometimes even go as far as thinking of waste, fraud, abuse, or corruption. For others, they look at it as a group of individuals who are professional experts in their field that operate on behalf of the government to manage the systems that are necessary for all of the American society to operate. And that's why it's often referred to as the fourth branch of government, which creates this administrative structure within the federal government. And it has existed for a very long time. Since the Reconstruction era, the bureaucracy has been a central part of our political process. The operation of bureaucracy, the organization of it, is something we call public administration, which is how we implement public policy through government bureaucracies and how we study it as civil servants to make sure it's organized and efficient in the future. This is usually organized in a hierarchical system in which all of these entities are separate and do not communicate with one another, yet they all work within this connected system to make our planes land on time, to ensure that car manufacturing is safe, to ensure that OSHA keeps up proper work requirements for your employer, and so on and so forth. What a W-2 looks like, what your driver's license looks like, how you get a passport. All of that is part of this system. And of course, the bureaucracy has had to grow because of the historic and traumatic events we have endured as a society. Beginning in the turn of the 20th century, as the 1800s go into the 1900s, what we call the Progressive Era, we saw a huge shift in bureaucratic growth because of our involvement, World War I, changes in a lot of our federal systems, the creation of the Federal Reserve, commissions on electricity and power. We had new enfranchised groups participating in the vote, like women, that also needed their own agencies and organizations. And so the Progressive Era saw the first real growth of the bureaucracy. By 1929, the Great Depression will cause such massive record levels of unemployment, poverty, food shortages, in general what we call economic depression, that the bureaucracy will have to expand under FDR's New Deal programs to answer a lot of these challenges, like creating the FDIC to insure banks, since a third of all banking disappeared, to create food stamp programs and assistance safety net programs, because 1 in 4 people didn't just have very little, they had nothing at all. We will create labor relations boards to ensure that people can still connect with employment. Social Security will be developed for those who cannot participate. A lot of challenges we didn't have the answers for, we will now start to develop through the bureaucracy in this period. Then we will go through our Second World War, adding 700,000 people to the government and defense department through the military-industrial complex as we expand our footprint around the globe. In the 1960s, Lyndon Johnson's Great Society programs will add 2 million people to the federal bureaucracy, creating things like the Opportunity Acts of 1964, which have the Voting Rights Act, a variety of civil rights acts. We will create programs like Job Corps, the SNAP Food Benefit Program, Head Start, Volunteers of America, the Peace Corps. All of these things will be created during that period of time. And then in that post-period, during the Reagan administration, we will add over 1 million more with the advancements of the Cold War through espionage, the growth of the military-industrial complex, and so on. So we've had these historical challenges that have called for this bureaucratic growth. And so what we see is our new form of government. So we have the Constitution deriving power to our 3 branches, legislative, executive, and judicial. But within the executive, we've developed 15 cabinet departments, and under them a multitude of executive agencies, which the president commands, and they have a huge amount of influence in our everyday lives. The cabinet is made up of 15 individuals who focus on the major categorical elements of our American government: healthcare, technology, housing and urban development, education, defense, our foreign uh, involvement, and so on and so forth, the Treasury. And each of these major cabinets, state, treasury, justice, interior, agriculture, commerce, and so on, each have their own internal bureaucratic structure. So you can see how extensive and almost cell membrane like the bureaucracy can be. It's quite extensive. Beyond these cabinets, like here's an example of the Secretary of Defense, we have a multitude of cabinet offices, agencies, and departments that operate in their own fields. Beyond those, we have what's called regulatory or executive agencies like the CIA, FBI, NASA, the Environmental Protection Agency, the FCC, SEC, ICC, all these things that regulate and operate executive agencies outside of the government are all within the American bureaucracy. And we can see how extensive that is as well as we look beyond the office of the president to all of these executive offices and then the elements of bureaucracy found within them. It's quite extensive. They're like Russian dolls that go on and on and on and on. And that's simply because of the demand that has been prescribed historically. Beyond that, we have what's called government corporations. These are agencies that are formed by the federal government to administer some type of private business service to the public, and they operate on their own, like the U.S. Postal Service or the Amtrak train service. The federal government does not pay to the operating costs of these agencies. They pay for themselves through our participation in the private economy. Now, there is plenty of oversight of the bureaucracy, despite what many Americans would believe. Congress has two ranging offices that look at what the bureaucracy spends, how they spend it, and where they're spending it, while the president is also highly involved in selecting the individual who chairs these offices, agencies, and departments. Despite that, we as citizens have a high amount of impact of how we can oversight the bureaucracy and its expanded growth as well. We have access to the Freedom of Information Act, which since the Johnson administration in the 1960s has given millions of Americans access to otherwise confidential, secret, or hidden accessible information by the federal government. So the Sunshine Act of 1976 during the Carter administration says that after a certain period of time, certain accessible information has to be made public. We've just seen a recent allocation of documents related to the assassination of John F. Kennedy that were a part of the Sunshine Act released last year. We also have certain protections for what we call whistleblowers, people who can come forward and publicize misleading, secret, or corrupt information about what the government is doing behind the scenes. Depending on where this whistleblower is located within the government determines what kind of protections they receive. A whistleblower in the Department of Agriculture is probably treated very differently than one from the State Department, depending on what classified information they're sharing. And we also have government privatization. If we're tired of the bureaucracy, its size, or its influence, sometimes we take matters into our own hands and privatize some of those elements of government, which can also limit bureaucratic influence. That is the end of Unit 3. We will move on to Unit 4 in the next section and video. If you have any questions or concerns related to the assessments, lectures, or resources related to this unit, please let me know.